The James Show Podcast.
I have no explanation on why this has been so popular over the last couple of weeks, but you may have noticed on your social media timelines too, reparations keeps coming up and keeps coming up. And there's people that are just private folks making their own videos, just, singular individuals. But then there's also people with TV shows who are talking about it. Let me give you a couple examples here. First, a viral video of a woman who's making the case on why she wants race-based reparations.
Until I get my reparations, I'm done caring about anybody else's issues, y'all. Like, I'm sorry, I don't care about nothing anybody else got going on because y'all don't care about me getting reparations, so why the should I give a about y'all problems? I don't care no more. I really don't. Until things are made right, I do not care about what y'all got going on.
Yeah, I kind of assumed you weren't worried about my problems anyway. You shouldn't be. You shouldn't. I have my own set of issues going on. I hope that doesn't burden you at all, whether or not you get reparations. And even if you did care, I don't think it would help. You can't even take care of yourself. I'm just assuming that. I take that last part back. Don Lemon has his own little show where he had a woman named Hillary Fordwich, who sounds British to me, and he brought up the idea of reparations. This is what I'm talking about. This keeps coming up over and over the last couple of weeks, so I just wanted to address it here. Don Lemon.
We're asking for reparations for colonialism, and they're wondering, $100 billion, $24 billion here and there, $500 million there. Some people want to be paid back, and members of the public are wondering, why are we suffering when you are, you have all of this vast wealth? Those are legitimate concerns.
Well, I think you're right about reparations in terms of if people want it, though, what they need to do is you always need to go back to the beginning of a supply chain. Where was the beginning of the supply chain? That was in Africa. And across the entire world, when the slavery was taking place, which was the first nation in the world that abolished slavery? The first nation in the world to abolish it. It was started by William Wilberforce, was the British. In Great Britain, they abolished slavery. 2,000 naval men died on the high seas trying to stop slavery. Why? Because the African kings were rounding up their own people. They had them on cages waiting in the beaches. No one was running into Africa to get them. And I think you're totally right. If reparations need to be paid, we need to go right back to the beginning of that supply chain and say who was rounding up their own people and having them handcuffed in cages. Absolutely. That's where they should start. And maybe, I don't know, the descendants of those families where they died in the high seas trying to stop the slavery, that those families should receive something too, I think, at the same time.
It's an interesting discussion, Hillary. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm sure he was out of time there, but she totally flipped the script on him. Wasn't that sweet? Now, I am against reparations in most of the ways it has been proposed, but I am not against all reparations. There is a way you could structure the program in which I would be in favor of it. Because the number one problem with the reparations that I see proposed is you're taking money from people who never owned slaves and you're giving it to people who never were slaves. In a lot of instances, you're taking it from people who not only did they never own slaves, their family fought and they had family members die fighting to free the slaves. So why should they be punished for the sins of the people they were literally fighting against, the people who were shooting at them? And then also, it's just so hard to figure out who should get them. You can't just say, well, all black Americans should get reparations. But really, what if your family immigrated here after the Civil War and they were therefore never in the lineage of slaveholders? Like a Barack Obama is a good example. His dad's from Kenya. Was never involved in American slavery, but he actually did have some relatives, obviously on his mom's side, going back to the Kansas days, that actually were participating in slavery. So, how do you work that out? And even people like the great Sunny Hostin from The View, we find out when she goes on the Skip Gates show that she's actually descended from slave traders. Do you know that?
Wow. I'm a little bit in shock. I just always thought of myself as Puerto Rican, half Puerto Rican. I didn't think I was, my family was originally from Spain and slaveholders.
Yeah.
So how are you feeling?
Yeah, how does that feel? Even LeVar Burton, the guy who played Kunta Kinte himself, the younger one. John Mooney was the older Kunta. In Roots, LeVar Burton has the stain of white people in his lineage.
You are looking at your great-great-grandfather, James Henry Dixon.
James.
It's difficult to make out, but that is your biological great-great-grandfather.
Now, I'd have fought you 5 minutes ago if you told me that I had a white great-great-grandfather.
You do. You can fight me, but it's the truth. And ain't nothing you can do about it.
What? Kunta got white ancestry.
Yeah, that's right.
See, so we're a little more mixed up and familial than a lot of people like to pretend. But let me give you the short version of the reparations I would support. You say you wouldn't support that. What would you support, James? Well, the federal government owns 31% of the land in the United States. Go Google it. The original reparations was 40 acres and a mule. No one wants a mule anymore. But what about the 40 acres? You know, if we took all the land that the federal government's not supposed to own anyway, Constitution is pretty explicit in that, and we made good on the promise, then you solve a lot of these problems. Then you're not taking money from people who were never slaveholders or even supported slavery and giving it to people who were never slaves and maybe mixed up with slaveholders in their lineage. This is land that the government's not supposed to have anyway. The only people that's hurt by this is the federal government. And it is a much better base of wealth building, especially generational wealth, than a one-time check for $9,000 or $100,000. That could all be squandered within 3 months or whatever. But land, that's something that your kids and grandkids can live on. Will give you a total tax abatement for a generation or two. And that's the fact that the federal government, it's pretty explicit in the Constitution. The federal government's only supposed to own the lands that it needs to operate. So, you know, like where the Capitol building is and the White House and whatever office buildings they own and like military bases and embassies, things like that. They're not supposed to own 89% of Nevada, but they do. They're not supposed to own pretty much the eastern half of Oregon, but they do. 80-something% of Utah, but they do. And it turns out if you do want to do some quick math, if you take all the federal lands away from the big government in D.C. and you start divvying up, hopefully to get to the 40 acres part of the 40 acres and a mule, and you use that for reparations, here, you can have this plot of land. We'll give it to you tax-free for a generation. I would say 2 generations to be generous, but I'm soft pedaling it to see if I can get you on board. Because what's the negative consequences to anybody else? What's the negative consequences to you? Nothing. What's the positive consequences? Well, I can think of a lot of positive consequences. 800-288-9227. But the positive consequences, number one, land ownership is a good thing. It's a good base to build generational wealth. You can hang on to it. You can live on it. And if you have your own land and you don't have any property taxes, then you can literally live rent-free. That's the dream. Is there a better way to build wealth than taking away the biggest expense most of us have every month? Another way is that this will so much realign the diaspora that's unusually concentrated in urban areas and disperse them out. And once they get out of urban areas, once they get out of this bubble and they actually have land that they have to take care of, they have to be good stewards of it. They have to mow. They have to go to Home Depot and get a riding lawnmower and whatnot. That's just not something that's experienced by people who live stacked on top of each other in these giant buildings in a downtown area or in a major metropolitan area. It's a totally different lived experience, and it would probably pull them a little to the right wing of the political ideology. There's a reason why rural areas are far more Republican than urban areas. It's a different lived experience, to borrow their term. But also it's going to be good and for reparations in the fact that some people are going to be in oil patches and have mineral rights and just get blindingly rich off of it. But also it'll turn people into givers, not takers. You're off the grid. You're out of the system. You're no longer dependent on public housing or Section 8 because we're going to get rid of all that with the reparations. But also think about this big demographic switch means almost all big cities are going to go Republican. If they're losing their strongest, most strident voter demographic for the Democrats, then what happens? Well, Fort Worth is going to be solid Republican. If you had a big chunk of our black neighbors move out of Dallas, what does the voting base look like then? Does Dallas go Republican? Think of all these big cities. How would that change? Hell, Chicago might go Republican. I can't think of a whole lot of downsides because the government's not supposed to have that land to begin with. 800-288-9227. This is Brandy in Richardson. You're on WBAP. Go.
Hey, James, are you going to limit it to just African Americans? Or are we going to include Native Americans?
No, I don't think I'm going to include Native Americans. They have their tribal lands, and that's sort of a similar deal. Although I don't like that issue the way it stands now. That's not going to be part of my reparations plan.
Okay, well, in that case, I would like reparations from all the idiots that voted for Biden.
Yeah, that's not really going to happen. I don't think we can do that. Generally speaking, are you for it or against it?
I think it would be a big waste. I think that they would squander it, sell it to some developer, and piddle away the money.
Well, some would, but I imagine a lot of them would do the right thing, and they would be rewarded for it. And if they want to be foolish with it, that's their right. They can go ahead and, burn it to the ground and move on, and they have no more complaints here. I don't want to hear about it. We already gave you reparations. What'd you do with your land? Oh, you squandered it. Well, then that's on you. And so now I think the collective guilt goes away. This is Ann in Waco. You're on WBAP. What do you think about the reparations plan?
Well, I think it could be a good plan, but I have a little bit of adjustment to that. I don't think it should be 40 acres. It should be something, but when does it start and when does it end? Because since the dawn of time and people want to conquer one another, there's always been an indentured servant or a slave population. But what if we divided it out? What about every American that served our country that is in need of a home or space? Why don't they get something?
Because they were never enslaved.
Well, they should get something for serving America.
Well, they got a paycheck, and they get the GI Bill, and they get VA benefits. We already do a lot, and if you want to go get a mortgage, you can go get a mortgage that we have to subsidize, and you don't have to put any money down. There's already programs for veterans. We don't have to squeeze them into reparations. Well, let's not try and squeeze other people in here, whether it's Indians or veterans. Let's just focus on a group of people who did have a different experience. Veterans were never enslaved. Indians weren't enslaved in the same way that African Americans were enslaved. I like your attempt there, Ann. Thank you for working with me. Let's go to Ken in Arlington. You're on WBAP. Your thoughts on my reparations plan?
I don't think any registered Republican should have to pay reparations.
Well, we don't have to pay it at all.
Well, we freed the slaves. The Democrats didn't.
I stepped on a very good line, a very good point you're making. Yeah, and that's one of the problems with the reparations check. You have some people. I have a very complex family. I've done my lineage, and I have people from both from my family line that fought on both the Confederate and the Union side. So, how would you deal with me? But yeah, no, you're making a good point. There's other families out there, white families, who had family members go out and die fighting to free the slaves, and you're going to take money from them? You're going to punish them? Yeah, so that's a great argument against the reparations check, but what about my reparations land allotment, Ken?
No, because I think once you give them the land, then you're going to have to give them the lawnmower to cut the grass. Then you're going to have to give them the tractor to farm the land. Then you're going to have to give them the animals to produce the food that they want to eat.
Absolutely not. No. You don't get a tractor. You don't get anything else. You get the land, and we'll just call it even after that.
Oh, I guess so. Just give them the land. Just as long as there's no mineral rights on it.
No, give them the mineral rights. Why are you so chintzy, Ken? It's land that we're doing nothing with, and it's like most of Utah, and it's most of Nevada, and it's a big chunk of Idaho and Montana and Arizona. I can hear you being open-minded about it, though, so I really appreciate that. Cleo in Plano, you're on WBAP. Your thoughts on my reparations plan?
Okay, well, I want to know is how do we know who's going to be black enough to get this? And the way I'm going from this is, because you know me, James, I'm half black, half white. Are we going to be going back to the one drop rule? Is that what they're going to do? Say, oh, well, you're only 30% black, but, your ancestors said from your genealogy that they were from the slave colony, but you still get land. I mean, how are they going to do that? These
are great questions, because there is a little bit of gray area, because I'm not really settled on that. When you go and you try and get a student loan or qualify for some of these scholarship programs, usually they have, I don't know what the rule is. It's kind of like the half and half rule. Maybe we can call it the Cleo rule. But if you're more than half, if you're half black, that's what it takes to qualify for the black scholarships. When I was applying in college, so if one of your parents was black, you were in. If both of your parents were half black, if they were both Cleos, you're in. But more or less than that, you're just falling either off the category or into the categories. So it could be the half rule. I also like the idea that even if you break the half rule, but one of your white descendants was a slave owner or one of your black descendants was a slave owner, I think that should disqualify you. So Sonny Hostin, while she is half black, wouldn't qualify because on the Puerto Rican side of her family, some of her descendants actually owned slaves. So she would be disqualified.
And that's what I mean. That's the rub of it. How do we know?
Well, if they can find out for Skip Gates' show on PBS, what was it called? Finding Your Roots or Discovering Your Roots or whatever.
Yes.
We'll just get Skip to do it all. Apparently, we have the ability, the tools at our disposal to do it for LeVar Burton from Reading Rainbow. Certainly, we can do it for my James Show reparations program. But those are good questions, and I don't have them all worked out, Cleo.
Thank you, James.
Thank you.
Thought I could bring that up.
That's good. Henry McKinney, you're on WBAP. Go.
All right, thanks. I'll make my comment and then I'll hang up and hear what you got to say.
Sure.
First of all, I'm not a fan of reparations, period. I don't believe the federal government has a right to give away a land they're not supposed to own. And wouldn't the states be next in line for that land after that?
Well, here's a little secret of the pros. Go ahead and hang up, and I'll talk on that. He's right. They should be next in line. But also, I feel like the state government shouldn't have excess land except for the buildings that they're on. James, what about state parks? Man, I'm kind of iffy on state parks, actually. So y'all might want to tap the brakes on, well, what about national parks? Forget the national parks. That's not supposed to be a thing. The Constitution was pretty clear about that. So, no, you know, they're not supposed to give away land they're not supposed to have. I don't know if there is a supposed to. They're already not supposed to have that land. So how do we decide how they give it up? Sell it back into commerce? I mean, that's one way, but then they would be profiting off of it. And so I kind of like the government getting stiffed by just giving it away. This is Tim and Sherman. You're on WBAP. Your thoughts on reparations. Go.
Afternoon, brother. There's a lot of math to be done in these equations.
Yes.
So if there's a reparation amount figured out, is there an offset? Just say the folks have been on welfare for X amount of years. Say they're third generation welfare, fifth generation. Who knows? Is there an offset there?
No, I'm willing to overlook all that. Those were mistakes. Those were payments that I didn't support. I didn't like any of those programs my entire life. I have never been a fan of those. But I am going to be so magnanimous, I'm not going to hold it against them. No. Go ahead.
Slaves were released. Had to have been some paperwork in place. What was the problem? Because you read my mail earlier with the 40 acres and the mule. I mean, 40 acres these days could get you anywhere between $40,000 to $2.5 million.
Well, yeah, but they can't all sell at the same time. You'd flood the market. The price would fall out the bottom. And plus, how many people are going to want, distant land in the Utah hinterlands like that? So, I mean,
1 acre and a buck tussle Shetland pony. Final offer. Appreciate you.
This is Steve in Denton on WBAP. Go.
First of all, let me preface this by telling you, I am the child of a lady who was an orphan from age 3 to age 16. She lived in a convent. At 16, told to get on the streets. My father was so dirt poor, he sold food to fishermen in the morning so his family could eat in the evening. I understand poverty. Before I got to high school, they owned 3 businesses. They never took a dime of federal assistance. They never owed anybody anything. They paid for everything raising their family. Reparations, number 1, equitable relief requires you never create an unjust enrichment. Currently, I know of nobody alive today who was a slave. And the poverty you see today is not because of slavery. It's because of vagrancy. People who choose a lifestyle which perpetuates poverty. It's in my race and all other races. Nobody makes these guys father 10, 15 children from different women and never stay to raise one of them. Nobody makes these women go get pregnant from 5 or 6, 8, 9, 10 different men and never marry because that way they can get their check. The poverty problem we have today is because of life choices with very, very few exceptions. And those are exceptions would be the people who are actually physically ill, critically ill, and because of situations beyond their capacity to control, they're in poverty. Those people need to be helped. The rest of them need to stop their stupidity and get a job and stop fathering kids and stop having kids out of wedlock who are going to be living in poverty because of your choices. That's the problem. You're creating an unjust enrichment for people who are in the situation they're in because of their own life choices.
Yeah, but okay, so would you take my land grant program if we, in turn, got rid of all these other social programs?
No, we need to get rid of the other social programs, too.
So you don't like either one?
You don't create an unjust enrichment.
How is this an unjust enrichment?
Because they're not in poverty today because of slavery.
I know, but
they're in poverty today because of their own life choices. You are rewarding.
Yeah, but here's the deal.
You are rewarding.
If it's unjust, who's the victim here? We're not taking money from you and giving it to them. In that case, that's not just to the people you're taking money from. But this is a victimless crime. If you're doling out land, who is hurt by this? Who is being aggrieved by this?
Everybody else who is working for what they own has to sit back and watch these people get an entitlement.
Okay, but this doesn't affect the land grant won't affect any of those people. It won't have any effect on me or you.
They will lose their economic position to people who will sell their land because they have no choice.
Well, then that's on them.
They have no desire to go live out in the country for the most part. They want to live in the city.
Well, they would prefer if they don't have to pay property taxes or rent. They could pretty much live for free. They just have to get some sort of shelter going.
You are hurting everybody.
I'm not hurting anybody. I'm not hurting one person.
You are, sir.
How?
You're changing the economic advantage that people have worked for by giving other people a free economic advantage. And they're not entitled
if one of your neighbors takes this deal and they go move to northern Arizona to live on their 40 acres, how does that affect you at all?
It affects the people in Arizona, sir. It affects their property value.
All right, I'm going to take some more calls. You're making some points. I see what you're saying. Not saying I agree, but you did well. Thank you, Stephen Denton. This is Jeanette in Paradise. You're on the James Show on WBAP.
Yes, sir. I don't agree with reparations at all. I'm pretty much in the same line as your previous caller.
Steve.
Steve, yes. But, if I were to open my mind to it, where would you begin? Because my grandfather was basically a child slave. He was given to a family to work on the farm, and then you've got that throughout.
Yeah, so I would start with the descendants.
What about victims of child trafficking?
Okay, so I guess you're new to the conversation. We covered this about 3 segments ago. We're not going to lump in everyone who has grievance into the reparations program. I realize Native Americans.
So your plan is based on black and white.
My plan is based on the descendants of American slavery. And those, at some point in Reconstruction, they were promised 40 acres and a mule, and I'm trying to make good on that promise. That's not to discount the suffering of your grandfather or people who were in child sex trafficking or Native Americans or any other people who have like a club foot or they're left-handed or whatever. I realize there's other people with other issues. We're just dealing with this one. And so that's the focus. That's the onus. Just the people who are direct descendants from black American chattel slavery. 800-288-9227, 800-288-9227. Also, you're disqualified if one of your descendants own slaves. So like a Sonny Hostin or a Barack Obama, they're disqualified. Eddie Weatherford, you're on WBAP. Go.
Yes, sir. It's not a good idea to me at all.
Why?
Well, I'm 75 years old, and I've worked hard all my life. With black people a lot. And, man, I've seen men move in with women just long enough to get them pregnant and move right back out.
Okay. What does this have to do with my reparations program?
The deal is, why should they, after all these generations, get anything free? They've had plenty of time to work just like I have.
Well, it's making good on a promise that they had. It's righting a wrong that is a stain on our nation's history, even though it's an institution that is shared by every civilization going back to the dinosaurs. But it's also, I think the beauty of this is it doesn't cost you anything. There's no victim here. We're not taking anything from anyone and giving it to someone else. The only person who's going to be punished by this or experience negative consequences from this is the federal government who set themselves.
Wait a minute. You're saying negative government. The government doesn't have any money. That money belongs to the people of the United States.
Right, and that's why
it's not rich.
I know. That's why I'm not giving them money. I'm giving them land.
That's still part of our land.
No, that's not our land.
That's given away. Yes, it is.
Go stand on it and tell me how long it's your land before you get arrested for trespassing.
The government runs it, and they're not going to allow you on it. But I guarantee you it belongs to the people of the United States of America.
No, go build something on it. If you own it, go try and build something on it. Go try and drill for oil on it. You don't own that. The federal government owns it. They shouldn't own it. I don't believe in collective ownership because I'm not a collectivist, and I'm part of the Enlightenment Western civilization idea of private property and individual rights. So no, I reject the whole. That's our land. Oh, really? You get a cut of the profits whenever they drill for oil on federal land? Because I don't either. Kent Garland, you're on WBAP. Go.
Hi, James. Yeah, I've given some thought to this 40 acres and a mule.
And it's brilliant, isn't it?
150 years ago, when they gave you 40 acres, it was probably raw land on the frontier. No house, no roads, no utilities. The nearest neighbor's a mile away. The nearest store is an all-day trip.
Yeah.
But if you work like a dog every day, you could survive, and after 4 or 5 years of that, you might actually have a little log cabin and get to the point where you were sort of comfortable.
Amen.
So in other words, 40 acres and a mule means we'll give you just enough support so you don't survive if you work really hard. And we already have that. Between the welfare and the food stamps and all the other government assistance programs, we've already given people a lot more value than they would have gotten.
And it didn't work. Giving them money didn't work, but giving them the tools to build wealth themselves. Can we at least try that before we condemn it?
Well, are you going to put a house on that 40 acres?
They can.
You're going to give them that too?
Well, look, they can go, if they want to go get like a shed from Home Depot to get a starter house, and then they can go work and save up some money to get the next bigger house, and then maybe build finally their for real house or a log cabin, or they can build it themselves, or they can do what the Amish do, and 800 of them get together and have a barn raised in a day. I don't know what they're going to do. There's probably going to be 1,000 different angles to it, and I'm not going to pretend like I know the answers on which one knows best, but the process by which they figure it out is also the process by which they figure out how to be self-sufficient. And food stamps and public housing and all these other social programs have done the opposite. It's turned them in, it's infantilized them. It's turned them into perpetual children and just wards of the state. And I think that's what the beauty of land is. It's not a handout. It's a hand up.
Well, you make some good points. I'll give you credit for being creative. And I will also point out, I think the last caller had a good, you can't just, if that land doesn't belong to the federal government, then it must belong to somebody. It doesn't seem right for them to just hand it out to people.
Well, no, I don't want them to take anyone else's land and give it to them, but the federal government owns 31% of the land mass available in the United States, and they're not supposed to.
Consider this. I have heard that if they were to sell that land, they could make so much money they could wipe out the national debt. That might be a better thing to do with it in the long run.
Yeah, you know what? That's a pretty good counter argument there, Kent. I appreciate it. David in Fort Worth, go.
I think you're on a good idea compared to most I've heard, but I think you have only gone halfway. And here's what I'm saying. I believe reparations, there was an offense, and that was slavery in your topic today.
Yes.
The people that lost all they had or lost drastically from slavery were one, the slaves, and it should everyone that died and lost all they had fighting for their freedom. And I think that's the only way to be fair if there was reparations.
Yeah.
And
so you're saying,
I really believe that.
So you're saying you should get a land grant if you're shown to be a descendant of someone who was enslaved or someone who died fighting for the Union in the Civil War?
Absolutely.
That's interesting. I don't know if we have enough.
Fair.
Kind of. They were never enslaved, and they were never promised 40 acres and a mule, and their families all got, the pensions that they were entitled to. If you were a guy who died for the Union in the Civil War and you had a surviving family, they got a pension. I know this because I have a great grandfather who died in World War I, and my grandmother was raised on his $50 pension until she was 18 or whatever. So I don't know. That's something to consider. If we have enough land to go around, maybe we'll talk about it then, but we'll take care of the people who are descendants of the actual enslaved first, and then maybe move up to descendants of the those who perished for the Union. Mark Benbrook, you're on WBAP. Go.
Thank you for taking my call. I agree with Steve and some of your previous callers that we don't know, there's no way to know that the descendants of slaves are in the state they're in because of the fact that their ancestors were slaves.
Oh,
and the
agreed.
second thing is that I think you're being naive to say that giving them this quote unquote federal land that is 31%, whatever, is not hurting anybody, because as the previous caller said, with a $37 trillion national debt, the value of that land does, in spite of what your argument earlier, and that value does belong to the people. And whether just because the laws don't make it easy to claim that doesn't mean the laws can't be changed. And the law should take care of that national debt. That in itself, and cut spending, but that the federal government is, insanely bent on doing. Those just prove that. You got to make all those cuts. That would benefit everybody, including descendants of slaves, much more than giving them some property. Steve pointed out perfectly that giving them something, unless they have a cultural change, a cultural mindset, giving them anything, property doesn't matter. We've been doing that for 100 years.
I'm not saying you're wrong. Help. I'm saying if we do this, I think there will be a cultural change, because they won't be inner city people surrounded in the blue bubble. They will be country people who have to deal with country things. They have to maintain trees and deal with nuisance animals. So they'll probably have to get like a rifle and learn how to shoot, and then they'll be in the NRA, and they'll pretty much just turn into regular rural people.
I just think that's a naive perspective.
It might be. It might be, Mark, because
the culture is.
I know, but you're the fourth person to say that, so you're not alone in disagreeing with me on that point. So I'm reticent to say you're just wrong. I just disagree. Joseph Mesquite, go.
Hi, good afternoon, sir. Hey, you know what? If you took them 40 acres and built a shopping mall or a subdivision, or even just a few apartment complexes, you would change the tax base for the entire area. And that would affect me and what I pay for taxes. So, yes, it does affect me.
That would help you then.
It would. No, my taxes would go up.
No. See, you would have land that's otherwise not being utilized come into commerce and come into the marketplace. So you would be expanding the tax base. So in order for, the state capital or DC to if they were doing the same amount of taxation, there would be more going into the public treasury.
I think you're being very naive. Besides, if reparations are only because of the repercussions of slavery, America has more black millionaires and billionaires, congressmen, CEOs, president of the United States. Just look at the NFL, the NBA, and half of the National Baseball League.
Yeah, that doesn't bother me. I don't care if Michael Jordan gets 40 acres. That'd be cool. Hang on, I'm going to take some more calls.
People are being affected by slavery. People are being affected by their poor choices and the decisions they make in life.
That last sentence I totally agree with, too, but we can do both. Carl, Royce City, you're going to be the last word on this. Go.
Well, first off, I'm appalled at the fact that we're even having this discussion. I do not agree with reparations. I do not agree with giving anybody anything that's already been given everything all their life, because they're just in a give me mentality.
But that ends that. There's no more handouts after this.
There's no way it ends that.
Well, that's part of the James Show reparations program.
Want something else.
Yeah, in exchange for the 40 acres, there's no more handouts. So this does end that. Some people just sound bitter. 800-288-9227. Oh, I'm sorry. We're done with the show. Coming up next, the Mark Levin Show. That's going to do it for the James Show. When I get out of here, I'm putting up the podcast. So whenever you're spending time later listening to podcasts or goofing around on YouTube, look for our stuff. We're on Facebook. We're on YouTube. We're on Twitter. We're on Instagram. We got all that stuff. Got a lot of good videos and highlights up there in the podcast and video world. So just remember me next time you're goofing around on your phone, and you can enjoy some more James Show even when I'm not live. I'm James Parker. This has been The James Show, News Talk 820 and 93.3 FM WBAP.
The James Show Podcast.